Idealism and Materialism, a Reflection by H.P. Lovecraft. Human thought, with its infinite varieties, intensities, aspects, and collisions, is perhaps the most amusing, yet discouraging spectacle on our turquoise globe. It is amusing because of its contradictions, and because of the pompousness with which its possessors try to analyze dogmatically an utterly unknown and unknowable cosmos, in which all mankind forms but a transient, negligible atom. It is discouraging because it can never, from its very nature, attain that ideal degree of unanimity which would make its tremendous energy available for the improvement of the race. The thoughts of men, molded by an innumerable diversity of circumstances, will always conflict. Groups may coincide in certain ideas long enough to found a few definite intellectual institutions, but men thinking together in one subject differ in others, so that even the strongest of such institutions carries within itself the seed of its ultimate downfall. Conflict is the one inescapable certainty of life. Mental conflict, which invariably becomes physical and martial when the intellectual breach attains sufficient width and the opposing minds are divided into factions of suitable proportions. Followers of the world brotherhood and universal peace delusion would do well to remember this scientific truth grounded on the basic psychological nature of man before deciding to continue in their always absurd and often disastrous course. Most decided and obvious of all the eternal conflicts of the human thought is that between the reason and the imagination, between the real and the material, and the ideal or spiritual. In every age, each of these principles has had its champions, and so basic and vital are the problems involved that the conflict has exceeded all others in bitterness and universality. Each side, having its own method of approach, is impervious to the attacks of the other. Hence, it is unlikely that anything resembling agreement will ever be reached. Only the impartial, objective, dispassionate observer can form a just verdict of the dispute, and so few are these observers that their influence can never be great. Man slowly coming into existence as an efflorescence of some simian stalk, originally knew nothing beyond the concrete and the immediate. Formerly guided by reflex action or instinct, his evolving brain was an absolute blank regarding everything beyond those simple matters of defense, shelter, and food procuring, whose exigencies had brought it into being. If this primal brain developed along the path of the original impelling force, its intrinsic strength and activity outstripped the material which it had to feed upon. Since no sources of information were in existence to supply it, its dawning curiosity, perforce, became inventive, and the phenomena of nature began to be interpreted in such simple terms as nascent race could devise a nascent race and comprehend. The sun was good. Men were comfortable when it was present, uncomfortable when it was absent. Therefore, men should act toward the sun as they might act towards a chieftain or pack leader who was able to confer and withdraw favors. Leaders give favors when people praise them or give them presents. Therefore, the sun should be praised and propitiated with presents. And so were born the imaginative conceptions of deity, worship, and sacrifice. A new and wholly illusory system of thought had arisen, the spiritual. Well, I would say that the spiritual came first, and then trying to combine it into animism and dynamism, and that developing into other forms of polytheism arose. The development of an ideal world of imagination, overlying and trying to explain the real world of nature, was rapid. Since, to the untutored mind, the conception of impersonal action is impossible, every natural phenomenon was invested with purpose and personality. If lightning struck the earth, it was willfully hurled by an unseen being in the sky. If a river flowed toward the sea, it was because some unseen being willingly propelled it. And since men understood no source of action but themselves, these unseen creatures of imagination were endowed with human forms despite their more-than-human powers. So rose the awesome race of anthropomorphic gods, destined to exert so long a sway over the creators. Parallel illusions were almost innumerable. Observing that his welfare depended on conformity to that fixed course of atomic, molecular, and mass interaction, which we now call the laws of nature, primitive man devised the notion of divine government, with the qualities of spiritual right and wrong. Right and wrong indeed existed as actualities in the shape of conformity and nonconformity to nature, but our first thinking ancestors could conceive of no law save personal will, so deemed themselves the slaves of some celestial tyrant, or tyrants of human shape and unlimited authority. Phases of this idea originated the monotheistic religions. There's a difference between monotheistic and monotheism. Then came the illusion of justice, observing that exchange is the natural basis of human relations, and that favors are most frequently granted to those who give favors. Man's imagination extended the local principle to the cosmos, and formed the sweeping conclusion that boons are always repaid by equal boons, that every human creature shall be rewarded by the powers of governing gods of nature in proportion to his good deeds or deeds of conformity. This conclusion was aided by the natural greed or desire of acquisition inherent in the species. All men want more than they have, and in order to explain the instinct, they invoke an imaginary right to receive more. The idea of retribution and divine punishment was an inevitable concomitant of the idea of reward and divine favor. This element of desire played a vast part in the extension of idealistic thought. Man's instincts, made more complex by the added impressions received through the nascent intellect, in many cases developed novel physical and mental reactions, and gave rise to the isolated phenomena of emotion. Emotion, working hand in hand with imagination, created such illusions as that of immortality, which is undoubtedly a compound of man's notions of another world as gained in dreams, and of the increasing horror of the idea of utter death as appreciated by a brain now able to comprehend as never before the fact that every man must sooner or later lose forever his accustomed pleasures of hunting, fighting, and lying before his favorite tree or cave in the sun. Or if you're me, it would be the shade, right? Man does not want to lose these pleasures, and his mind seeks for an escape from the unknown and perhaps frightful abyss of death. It is doubtful if the savage, remembering nothing but life, can conceive of absolute non-existence. He finds false analogies, like the vernal resurgence of plant life and the beautiful world of dreams, and succeeds in persuading his half-formed intellect that his existence in the real world is but part of a larger existence, that he will either be reborn on earth or transplanted to some remote and eternal dream world. Later on, the illusion of justice plays a part in the comedy and man, failing to find abstract equity in actual life. It is glad to invent a future life of repayment and adjustment according to merit. With such a beginning, we need not marvel at the development of an elaborate and highly cherished system of idealistic philosophy. The advance of the intellect, without previous scientific knowledge to guide it, had the effect of strengthening emotion and imagination, without a corresponding strengthening of ratiocinative processes, and the immense residue of unchanging brute instinct fell in with the scheme. Desire and fancy dwarfed fact and observation altogether, and we find all thought based not on truth, but on what man wishes to be the truth, lacking the power to conceive of a mighty interaction of cosmical forces without a man-like will and a man-like purpose, humanity forms its persistent conviction that all creation has some definite object, that everything tends upward towards some vast unknown purpose, our perfection. Thus arise all manner of extravagant hopes, which in time fasten themselves on mankind and enslave his intellect beyond an easy redemption. Hope becomes a despot, and man comes at last to use it as a final argument against reason, telling the materialist that the truth cannot be true because it destroys hope. As the complexity of the mind increases and reason, emotion, and imagination develop, we behold a great refinement, subtilization, and systemization of idealistic thought. In the interim, aesthetic and intellectual interest have arisen, demanding improvements and concessions in the dominant religions or superstitions of man. Idealizing must now be made to conform to the actual facts which have been unearthed, and to the quickened sense of beauty which has grown up. At this stage, the great civilizations are forming, and each fashions one or more highly technical and artistic scheme of philosophy or theology. At first, that advances tend to confirm the idealistic notion. Beauty breeds wonder and imagination, whilst partial comprehension of the magnitude and operation of nature breeds awe. Men do not pause to question whether their gods could in truth create and manage a universe so vast and intricate, but merely marvel the more at gods who are able to perform such cosmic prodigies. Likewise, each thing on earth becomes merely the type of some imaginary better thing or ideal, which is supposed to exist either in another world or in the future of this world. Out of the pleasantest phases of all objects and experiences, imagination finds it easy to build illusory corresponding objects and experiences, which are all pleasant. Whilst all mankind is more or less involved in this wholesale dreaming, particular nations develop particular notable idealistic systems. Based on their especial mental and aesthetic capacity, here Greece, foremost of cultural centers, easily leads the rest, with the primitive mythology of unexcelled loveliness. She is likewise the foremost of latter idealistic philosophies, that of Plato. It is this Platonic system, sometimes operating through the clumsy covering of an alien Hebraic theology, that forms the animating force in idealism today. The idealist of today form two classes, theological and rationalistic. The former are frankly primitive and use the crudest and least advanced methods of argument. The latter adopt an outwardly scientific attitude and honestly believe themselves to be working from facts alone, yet are overwhelmingly influenced by the illusions of human perfectibility and a better world, and clinging to these hoary fancies, they generally seize upon the rather recently discovered and indubitably proven law of evolution to sustain them, forgetting the infinite slowness of the process and overlooking the fact that when evolution shall have really affected our descendants to any appreciable degree, they will no longer belong to the human race, mentally or physically, any more than we belong to the simian race. Of the two idealistic types, the theological deserves respect for its accomplishments, the rationalistic for its intentions. Religion has undoubtedly been the dominant factor in facilitating human relations and enforcing a moral or ethical code of practical benefit in alleviating the sufferings of mankind. The human reason is weak in comparison to instinct and emotion, and up to the present